February 20th, 8 p.m. at the Cobra in Nashville, Tennessee. Come see my band, Crusade. We just announced our new singer, Brian, officially joining the band. He'll be joining us for the first time at that show. You should come see us. Beatles everywhere, but not a song to sing. It makes zero sense, and I'm sorry, I just don't know how to intro this video. The Beatles are one of my favorite bands ever, as a lot of you already know, and even people who don't like the Beatles at least acknowledge just how important and influential they are to how we create, consume, and understand music today. Disclosing my massive biases in favor of the Beatles up front, I have not included an F tier on this list because in my stupid eyes, I cannot imagine a Beatles album being F tier, even Yellow Submarine. That absolute fucking embarrassment of a release. The Beatles were rocking the music industry in a very different time when it worked way differently than it does now. There are a bunch of singles that are really important singles to their catalog into music history that never made it onto any albums. I did my best to associate those with the albums I think they most likely associate to. I think if you're gonna be talking Beatles albums, you gotta include some of the most iconic songs of all time. You're also gonna hear me say the word iconic a lot today. Considering how many iconic songs there were that were never released on albums, I felt like it wouldn't be fully fair to really get the full picture without including those. I may have missed some. I hope I categorized them correctly. If I messed it up, let me know in the comments, though I'm pretty sure it wouldn't sway my judgment that much. And also keeping in mind that a C-tier Beatles album is still better than most albums that anyone will ever release ever. These are a tier list comparing Beatles album to Beatles album, not Beatles album to all of the albums in the entire world. So here is my Beatles album tier list. For those who don't know, here is how I do my tier list ranking, just so we're clear up front. Say we're putting these guys in B tier. Let's just pretend for a second. This would be the least favorite song in that tier. Next favorite, next favorite. I go least favorite to next favorite this way. You get it. You understand. I'm sorry. I need to stop talking. There's a number of people who watch my videos who believe that's just a general rule I should follow. Enough of both this chit and this chat. I guess I already spoiled this one for you. Yellow Submarine. Holy crap. Why? Why is this a thing? I debated whether or not to even include this, since the only two songs anyone cares about off this album aren't from this album. There were 4 new Beatles compositions, 3 of which no one gave a fuck about. Altogether Now is fun, but it has even less substance than other of McCartney's more carefree, nonsensical songs, which, hey, by the way, is fine, but it has like nothing to it. It has that one hook, and that's it. The rest is a totally fine and suitable film score, just not good enough to listen to outside of the context of the movie. This seemed more like one of the Beatles' more blatant money grabs, a lot more sad than enjoyable. If there was an album that could belong in F tier, it would be Yellow Submarine. D tier, also Beatles for Sale. This, again, feels more like the label pressuring them to create and less like it came from a place of genuine inspiration. I am positive the pace they were on at that time between having to write, record, and tour a bajillion days out of the freaking year, like almost every day of the year, they were moving on the road and releasing 2 albums a year plus singles. So even for being the album that I hear the absolute least inspiration and heart on, I can't blame them that much. The songs somehow seemed extra whiny than the previous 3 releases somehow, and the compositions felt like they really didn't have a real point to drive home. 8 Days a Week is an awesome song, and I Feel Fine is a great single that can be included here. I love them both. Not enough to save this album. With the Beatles, man, they had some fucking weird names for albums back in the day. All My Lovin' is a really strong song, but all the other strong songs on here are covers. There's a really nice rendition of Till There Was You, the iconic covers of Roll Over Beethoven and Mr. Postman. I wasn't sure where to include She Loves You, one of their most iconic songs ever. She Loves You was released in August, this album was released in November, and the previous album was released in April. I chose not to include it on this album. I can include I Wanna Hold Your Hand though, which is a massive song for them. The rest of the originals on this album were quite forgettable though. They felt very factory made, just not great. Not a lot of spice, there's no juice, there's no sauce. Come on, give me that lovin', baby. All that lovin' you guys won't shut the fuck up about. While it's nice seeing the Beatles acknowledge some of their influences, especially in the African-American music scene, if 3 out of the 4 songs that are good on your album aren't yours, it's not a good sign. Oh my god, it's the Magical Mystery Tour. First of all, what a fucking horror show that cover art is. Thank you, Beatles, for giving generations of 6-year-olds nightmares they will never recover from. This was a really weird one to rank that I didn't know exactly how to place it just because of how mashed together this whole fucking thing is. The Beatles were making a movie that was going to have an associated original Beatles composition soundtrack that was half of this album. That movie was totally shit tier, and the music made specifically for that movie was mostly not good. I Am the Walrus is awesome, I will say that. It took a while for that song to grow on me, but freaking choice, dude. Blue Jay Way is kind of cool, but not perfect. I actually really appreciate the mood experimentation they did with something that has a lot of anticipation and anxiety, and it's a song about waiting for your friend to show up. Interesting, but I don't really like listening to it. Hello Goodbye was the single that came out of the magical, fuck this thing. Hello Goodbye was the single that came out of the Magical Mystery Tour sessions, and it is an awesome song, which helped boost this quite a bit for me. There are 4 other songs at the end of the album that were all singles released beforehand that were just tacked on at the end. Now, normally that shouldn't be a big deal, except that those 4 singles were not done at the Magical Mystery Tour sessions. They were done on the Sgt. Pepper sessions. So do they really count? I mean, technically they were released on the album, and if we're gonna treat Abbey Road the same way and not tack those songs onto Let It Be, I can kind of get that. But also those songs weren't finished and released, so there's also that aspect. Penny Lane is arguably the strongest song on this album, but it's arguably not really a part of the album either. It kind of feels like half crappy movie soundtrack with shitty music and half compilation album of songs that should have been on Sgt. Pepper's, but it would have messed up the pacing. I really don't even know how fair it is to assess this whole thing, but I placed it as fair as I felt I could possibly do it. It's not a total piece of shit. It's a piece of shit in disguise. Let it be, let it be. How the fuck does he always get that fucking weird ass, let it be? I don't know how he does his voice like that. After the release of the documentary Get Back, which I did a video on, a documentary that showed the writing process for this album, I appreciated this album a lot more than I had before. But after listening back to it again and having to judge the album on its own merits as opposed to how I felt about the story surrounding its creation, it's not that good. Let It Be and Abbey Road are proof to me that the Beatles could not get the train back on the track after Brian Epstein died. It was very clear after Magical Mystery Tour and the White Album that the Beatles were not in sync with one another, and Let It Be and Abbey Road were their attempts to re-sync. Okay, while Let It Be is more synced than the White Album, it still feels mostly aimless and low effort. As a matter of fact, I ranked White Album higher than this, even though they were more out of sync. The songwriting and the production do not stand up to the amount of care and love that were put into the previous works. Even though there is a big coolness factor of having a literal live recording. And they do have some great hits on this album. I mean, Get Back, Let It Be, Long and Winding Road, Across the Universe. What a friggin' stellar composition. No pun intended. Hi joke, I'm dad. But as a whole, you could tell the Beatles were pretty much done. I just couldn't hear the inspiration anymore. Some pretty cool ideas, some great ideas, not all of them fully realized. All right, B tier, Hard Day's Night. This album was a distinct evolution in the Beatles sound that turned the world with them. I know, shocker at this point.
I'm shocked.
They started experimenting more with unorthodox chord progressions, melodies, backing vocals. They were creating a new viable way to write hooks in rock radio and pop music that weren't really done before. We see the introduction of folk-inspired ballads like And I Love Her and I'll Be Back. Then you have your massive successes in Hard Day's Night and Can't Buy Me Love. Man, so much attitude in both of those songs. Good times. This was the beginnings of our teeny bopper money machine starting to mature into proper artists. The lyrics were still very cheesy, but beginning to grow in sophistication. And they were starting to toy with the composition formula little by little, just getting a hair more unorthodox. And the other tracks didn't feel like just complete waste of space filler like other tracks in this era. Looking at you, Beatles for Sale. Holy shit, that was bad. Not an amazing album, but a landmark album no less, with some of the most important songs to rock and roll. Some might say they were iconic. Please me. Next one up, I think that's almost smack dab in the middle. Yeah, right about. Their breakout debut that set the world on fire. The album that began Beatles Mania. For any of you Zoomers who do not know what Beatles Mania is, you should go look that up because it's extremely significant in history, not just music history. I saw her standing there. Misery. Please me. Do you want to know a secret? Just to start with the hits. Then you had the massive world-changing songs like From Me to You, Love Me Do, She Loves You. Too many U's in all of these titles makes me kind of sound a little bit weird. She Loves You was a little bit weird to squeeze on this album, but I did. It was like just after, but also kind of in between the two albums. And the performance that completely changed the game forever. Twist and Shout, a cover song, but I think one of the most important ones because it very clearly illustrates what was so important about the Beatles. Everyone credits them with being these awesome composers, which they were. I mean, mainly in melody. But one of the biggest things they brought to the table was their sound and their attitude. That song was not composed by them, but they did it better than anyone else ever had, and they did it differently than anyone else ever had. It's literally a game-changing cover song. Weird to say it out loud, but it changed music. You're also gonna hear me say change a whole lot in addition to iconic. It's far from a perfect album. All the other tracks I haven't mentioned on here are pretty humdrum, and I wouldn't say completely cookie cutter for the time, but not that interesting either. This album is loaded up with so many world-changing songs, especially if we include the singles, that I think it'd be hard for me not to put this in B tier. They were still rough, they were still discovering their sound, blending rock and roll blues forward with Motown sound and then cranking up the tempo. And many of the tracks still very much come across as very cheesy and cliche, keeping in mind this is also one of the foundational bands that created those cliches. So those are big reasons why it doesn't go any higher, but regardless of all the criticisms, still a massively important album to human history. And this is where the video gets massively downvoted. Yes, the White Album in B tier. There are a ton of people who think this is their greatest album. I, to this day, cannot understand that. Yes, there are some great classics on here, some nice bops, but half the album is either completely underdeveloped ideas or just like, what the fuck direction are you headed in? There are some absolutely iconic songs on this album. Obla Da, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Helter Skelter, Blackbird, gorgeous song. George Harrison really stepped up his game on that one. Crap, almost forgot about Birthday. Birthday is a great song. I mean, for the record, I don't even like Helter Skelter, but it's 100% iconic. I would even include the singles Hey Jude and Lady Madonna as a part of this album grading. Hey Jude, definitely an Oscar. Lady Madonna, maybe less iconic, more moronic. That's a bad joke. It's a fine song. I just think it's a little annoying. But there were just a lot of lulls on this album, a lot less smash hits, and a lot more kind of like forgotten gems type of thing. Like you put the album on after a long time and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot. That song's kind of nice. It's not great. It's It's kind of nice. This album is either very comfy or very annoying. There's some really, really annoying songs on this album. It was so clear my first time listening to this the entire way through that this album was rudderless and needed a direction. It needed to be cut in half, frankly. There was not proper cohesion, and it was packed to the brim. It was audible in the music that something was off, and then when you read the stories of how tense and terrible the sessions were, makes total sense. Through all those critiques, which are basically just to justify why I feel like it's not an A tier or an S tier album, there is a lot of experimentation to be applauded and still a lot of great ideas and some excellent compositions. I just don't think it's remotely this masterpiece that a lot of people want to talk themselves into believing it is. There are imperfections for days on this album, and I would say not all the experimentation went well. This was the point, in my opinion, where it was audible that the Beatles had dropped out after tuning in. All right, A tier, we're going to help.
I just wanted to help. I don't need your help.
Yet another landmark album that changed the pop music game yet again. Surprise! This album is, in my opinion, the perfect middle tension between Please Please Me and Sgt. Pepper. It's like evolutionarily smack dab in the middle. The title track, Help, was a massive hit and was talking about things that other pop songs didn't talk about, which was literally anything other than love, and talking about it as if you were 14 and This Is Deep. This is before it was fashionable to slit your wrists. Act Naturally was less successful, but it was a kind of playful take on British nonsense. You know, kind of how they have their absurdist, nonsensical humor sometimes. And again, it wasn't what the typical pop songs were about. You got much more lyrical deviation, not derivation, literally the opposite, deviation on this album. Ticket to Ride was a melancholic twist on a traditional lost love story. You hear their folk influence and love for Bob Dylan come out on You've Gotta Hide Your Love Away and I've Just Seen a Face. I love I've Just Seen a Face. That song always puts me in a better mood, period. Yesterday is arguably one of the greatest compositions ever written and can be adapted to virtually any genre and still sound awesome. There are some teeny bopper leftovers on this album, the biggest reason it's not an S tier. There are definitely some filler tracks on here, but much like A Hard Day's Night, they were written a little bit more interestingly and creatively than the filler tracks on prior albums. Overall, this is a fantastic album. The final album the Beatles would create, but not quite the last to be released. Abbey Road. As seen in the Get Back documentary, some of the songs that would wind up on Abbey Road were actually being workshopped during the Let It Be sessions. The first 7 tracks on this album are bangers. The best streak they have had on any of their albums. To have 7 songs that strong from the very beginning of your album straight through is remarkable for anyone. Yes, even Octopus Garden, I fucking love that song, even if it's not iconic. It's just so carefree, and that's perfectly fine to be carefree. It is jolly as fuck. Come Together is badass. Something is one of the greatest love songs ever written and feels very genuine. I Want You is a blues jam venture that almost evokes Led Zeppelin. And then there's the back half of Abbey Road, which is essentially White Album Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. Suddenly, it's directionless and aimless. There are some up or okay moments in certain spaces, like Carry That Weight, sits really nice, always loved that section. But overall, it just feels like they had this awesome start and then it just dissolves on its way out. The back half is mostly unfinished songs that they just slapped together. And that is the reason it does not make S tier for me, which sucks. Because man, if they would have been able to actually collaborate properly together, that would probably be one of the greatest albums ever made. I mean, arguably it still is. It's an amazing album, even beyond all of the holes I want to poke in it. Fucking Rubber Soul, bruh. I feel like when people talk about greatest Beatles albums, this is one of the least talked about. Usually when I looked around on some lists, you'll find it around 5 or 6, which is fine. But I feel like a lot of people are sleeping on this album. Even a lot of fans kind of just taking it for granted. Look, it's definitely not perfect, but I really do think it outperforms Abbey Road. Even when the better compositions on Abbey Road are more sophisticated and maybe a little bit more mature than what you have on Rubber Soul. On Abbey Road, you have 7 very strong tracks from the beginning back to back in a streak. And then it falls apart into a disaster. You have Golden Slumbers, which segues into Carry That Weight, which is a nice section of the album in the back half. I really just consider those one song. Let's be honest, together they're 3 minutes and they're in the same key and they really do just kind of flow into one another. So we're just gonna call it the same song. So you have this big front load and then an absolute mess on the back half. Whereas with Rubber Soul, these experiences of nice songs are more evenly distributed throughout. You got Drive My Car, which by the way, is the absolute essence of cool. You want to talk about cool distilled into a sound, it is Drive My Car. You got Drive My Car, Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, Michelle, Girl, In My Life. 6 massive hits, not just strong songs. And if you include the singles, Day Tripper and We Can Work It Out, you have 8 massive hits. Do not think about including the single John and Yoko ballad bullshit ass shitty song on the Abbey Road one. It's effectively the first John Lennon solo release. Let's get real here. An Old Brown Shoe is fucking trash. Do you really want to try and put that in competition right now? Now, if you include the good songs off of Rubber Soul that just didn't see massive commercial success, You Won't See Me and think for yourself, 10 songs. 10 really good songs. Putting those against the 8 songs on Abbey Road that are either massive hits or just really good, and 9 if you want to be a dickhead about it. Abbey Road front loads all the awesome, and then the back half is kind of like what's going on, whereas Rubber Soul I feel like has a much more consistently great quality listening experience from beginning to end. Just like Hard Day's Night and Help, there are a few lull sections. Not every track on here is great, that's for sure. But just like Hard Day's Night and Help, those lull sections are greatly improved from the previous releases. This was an album when the Beatles decided the world needed to know they did drugs, and you can absolutely hear it on this album. This album actually would go and be a massive part of the psychedelia movement, and it influenced What's-His-Stupid-Face from the Beach Boys to help start writing Pet Sounds, which then came back to the Beatles and influenced them to start making fucking Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's, I forget which. Either way, it was like this really crazy competition of creativity. Point is, the experimentation on this album was great, and it paid off in spades. Yet another iconic turn of the wheel by the Beatles' hands. Don't overlook this album again, it deserves better. Fucking Revolver, bro. This album tops more greatest Beatles albums lists than I was anticipating. I was under the impression this might have been more of an underrated album, and I'm very happy to see I was wrong about that. It's nice to know I'm not the only one who thinks this album is... It just misses number 1 for me. And it's not because of its flaws so much as how its merits compete. This is arguably the most consistently great quality Beatles album, front to back. Honestly, it'll be easier for me to point out the weaker tracks rather than listing all the strong ones. Love You To and Doc Robert are fine, but they're not great. I'd say they are the least good on this album. Other than that, you either have hit songs like Yellow Submarine or Eleanor Rigby. What a fucking legendary song Eleanor Rigby was. More than iconic, holy crap. Or you have forgotten excellent songs like She Said and Gotta Get You Into My Life. The quality is so good on this album that tracks that people kind of forget about and they're like, crap, I totally forgot that song. That's a really great song. Would be singles on other Beatles albums. I have always described Revolver as the Beatles walking right up to the edge of the cliff of what normal pop music was right before they did a swan dive straight off that cliff on Sgt. Pepper's, just straight into the psychedelia ravine. They kept pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable for radio and what people would accept listening to. Freaking awesome album, hands down. Awesome album. This is not a surprise for a lot of you. Most of you guys clicking on this video knew I was gonna put Sgt. Pepper at number 1. I always thought Sgt. Pepper was the obvious answer for number 1, thinking my entire life that this was their crowning achievement and that was just obvious to everyone. This is not the full pinnacle of their psychedelic sound, but in my opinion, the best balance they ever had between the heart and soul of their earlier work, the experimentation that they always wanted to keep pushing throughout all of their albums, and then the maturity of their later work. The only track I really don't like on this album is For the Benefit of Mr. Kite, which by any technical analysis is still a great song and very memorable. I will say, I've always felt Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was always a little overrated. Hey, it's a great song, but it's not the next coming of Beatles. I mean, Jesus. Rita Rita Meter Maid, it's aight. I don't love it. I don't hate it. I don't mind listening to it. I legitimately love the rest of these songs. Every other song on this album. Love it. They are incredible pop songs with some of the best rock bass parts ever written. This, in my opinion, is Paul's best bass writing, period. She's Leaving Home is probably the most underrated Beatles song of all time. The moment the backing vocals hit fun and then the forward vocals go, fun is the one thing that money can't buy, it gives me chills almost every single time. This song is literally breaking my heart each time I listen to it. Just this story of these parents who really, truly, honestly love their daughter and they want to show her love, but they don't know how to show it to her in a way that she appreciates, and she winds up leaving home. And it's very sad. It's very tragic. It's very beautiful too. So freaking great composition, amazing arrangement. It's just tops. This album broke new ground for production. It broke new ground for songwriting, or what was acceptable in popular music, blah, 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 blah. Obligatory, iconic, moving on, we get it. This is one of the greatest, most important albums to music ever made. Everyone should listen to this album at least once. It is outstanding. So that's my tier list. What do you guys think? I would love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Again, my band Crusade is performing February 20th, 8 p.m. Cobra, Nashville. Come see us. We would love to see you there. If you like this video, drop a like, leave that comment, share the damn thing, do whatever. It would be very helpful to me and I would appreciate it. If you want to help me keep doing what I do, you can support me on Subscribestar. Link to that is in the description. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Become the Night. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you in the next video. Rock on.